stress. I had so much work I was doing on my computer this morning.
What do you do for a living?
Well, I used to work at an organic juice bar, but I just quit my job.
Okay.
I was a nutritionist. That's
okay.
That's my
That's
job.
cool.
And I just quit my job to travel across the country, and I'm trying to start a blog.
Okay.
Have a blog and stuff. So I've been building my website. So I've just been really stressed, and he doesn't really believe that I could do any of it. So that's kind of been like a, I don't know. He's like down there. I don't know. We've just been fighting all morning.
Nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear. The thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Every Shakespearean play contains histories, but also parables about love, fate and free will, madness and sanity, revenge, identity and of course appearances versus reality. There was always something Shakespearean about Gabby Petito's van life adventure. There was Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers cutting across the American fabric. But also all the themes mentioned above: love naturally, fate and free will within the paradigm of America's great outdoors. But then also the madness of Brian Laundrie's suicide letter versus the disquieting sanity of the Moab Stop. Gabby and Brian embarking on their adventure also meant the slipping of masks. The real Brian was exposed, brittle, bitter, petty, and spiteful. The psychological substrate upon which sadism and revenge germinated. Gabby's sin was being beautiful, but even worse, being likable. The unspoken truth of their van life journey was that with every successive Instagram, what was revealed was the widening schism between Gabby's burgeoning, ripening attractiveness versus Brian's waddling ordinariness. But perhaps there's no greater theme in Gabby's story than the price we pay for keeping up appearances. When we play games with reality, we tinker and tamper with fate. From seemingly benign tinkering with how things look versus how things really are, we invite upon ourselves the most dire consequences. Now, in this analysis, we're going to deal with the cryptic text that Brian sent at the end of this whole story. And then also we're going to look at Roberta Laundrie, Brian's mother's letter to him. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. We are going to do a further analysis of the Petito story in a live stream where we're going to be talking about the timeline as an important tool in our series on the TCRS toolbox, where we talk about the way we try to interrogate and investigate all of these cases, certainly how this channel approaches true crime. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So on September 4th, Brian Laundrie sent a series of texts to his friend Ben. This was about 2 weeks after murdering Gabby, and about the same amount of time before he'd take his own life. Brian's text to Ben read, "Trip was good. Gab and I had fun. Tired now. Gonna sleep for a week. We made a lot of content. It was once in a lifetime." Well, it certainly was once in a lifetime. Brian had seen to that. But the trip wasn't just good and fun. A big part of the trip was making content. And I experienced the same thing during my 9-week adventure through America. And actually, I've got a lot of that content still. I still haven't found the time to put it together, to put it online. I'll put some of that content online in this video, but there's a lot of that content that I did the work to and set out to take photos and record video. I still haven't done anything with it, and I'm a content creator. Now, it's one thing to capture photos and record video. It's quite another to find a quiet space and set aside some time in the middle of that adventure to cobble it all together. not doing so when you're a content creator means not doing your job. And meanwhile, you're having daily expenses, food, fuel, accommodation, and all of that is racing to catch up and ultimately take over. This can create a lot of daily stress. You hear Gabby talking about that stress, and I do think it's something that has been very underappreciated. I think you can only really know what she was going through if you're a content creator yourself and traveling with someone who perhaps isn't interested in that sort of thing. And so there's another stress that's far worse than the stress of trying to content create in the cauldron, in the theater of, spectacular nature, where everyone around you is having fun, on holiday, hiking, enjoying free time. And of course, you are there to some extent to work. And so what is much stressful, which adds a level of stress to that, is when you're traveling with someone who is in love with you and they start to feel threatened or insecure or impatient or unhappy with the fact that you want to, need to, or have to work. They seem to feel jealous that the time that they are sharing with you is not dedicated 100% to them. And so it does create a setup for an inevitable denouement. Now, for Brian, who is often the one recording Gabby, so it's one thing to be a content creator and you busy with your own content, but if you, on the other side, recording Gabby sparkling in front of a series of stunning landscapes, well, what was Brian's reward for that, for being behind the camera? Well, it was to watch Gabby emerge as the real star of the show. She was the one that everyone wanted to look at, wanted to interact with. She's the star attraction within their teetering alliance. And why is he so insecure? What is it about Brian that makes him feel possessive and that he wants to own Gabby and he wants to keep her to himself, not even allow her on social media, even when this is the express purpose? This is implicit in what they're doing out there. And that brings us to the next section, which I think has been underappreciated. And I think it needs to be put in context. The fact that Brian, like Brian Koberger, was a mama's boy. So what we're dealing with here is not just nature. It's not just Brian's personality. It's not just who he is. Probably the biggest difference between Brian and Gabby was their upbringing, was in their respective family backstory, how their respective parents differed from one another. Gabby had learned a measure of independence because her parents had divorced and she'd grown up in a mixed family. She'd experienced some of that sort of adversity, right? Brian, meanwhile, had grown up coddled. He was the only son of a doting mother. If there was any doubt about Roberta Laundrie's dotage, well, this letter to her darling boy declaring her unconditional love for Brian I think that puts those doubts to rest. She writes, "I just want you to remember I will always love you, and I know you will always love me. You are my boy. Nothing can make me stop loving you. Nothing will or could ever divide us. No matter what we do or where we go or what we say, we will always love each other. If you're in jail, I will bake a cake with a file in it. If you need to dispose of a body, I will show up." She scratches the word bring out there. "I will not bring a shovel. I will show up with a shovel and garbage bags. If you fly to the moon, I will be watching the skies for your re-entry. If you say you hate my guts, I'll get new guts. Remember that love is a verb, not a noun. It's not a thing. It's not words. It is actions. Watch people's actions to know if they love you, not their words." Now think about those words from his mother and social media. If you're putting up Instagrams and you are trying to, earn a living, and your actions aren't paying attention to the person that you're with, does that then really apply? If someone needs to go and make a living, Do they need to kind of incorporate you and consider you in every aspect, every detail of what they're trying to do to make a living? Anyway, on the next page, she writes, "Therefore I am certain that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor the ruling spirits, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers from above, nor powers from below, nothing in the entire created world can separate our love. Neither hostile powers, nor messengers of heaven, nor monarchs of earth, nothing has the power to separate us." And that is apparently from Romans 8, verse 38. And then she says something in addition to that: "Nothing can separate us, not hatred, not hunger, not homelessness, not threats, not even sin. Not the thinkable or the unthinkable can get between us. Not time, not miles and miles and miles." And so, if you think about that, isn't she in a way saying, and I mean, she probably had no way of knowing what her son had done or was capable of doing, but couldn't Brian Laundrie, especially if he received this before the fact, read into that I can get away with murder? My mother will always love me and support me. Isn't that, in a sense, kind of a license that no matter what I do, I've certainly got the guaranteed unconditional love from my parents? And I think the reality is something should make us stop loving someone else. Something should give us pause in terms of someone else's actions. Some things should divide us. So Roberta's exhortation of undying love is the reason Brian wouldn't and couldn't simply leave Gabby. Think about that. In a weird sense, Roberta's saying, "I will never leave you and nothing will ever separate us," is a kind of psychology that she passes over to Brian. And, I think if you want to know how to love obsessively, desperately, and unrealistically, well, here's the recipe. And so the question, was this letter written before the incident? Was it given to Brian as a sort of farewell, something to bolster his unstable confidence while away? It's undated, so we can't say for sure. It is interesting that the one word that's crossed out is to do with her showing up with a shovel. Many things in the letter echoed Brian's exact circumstances in the criminal sense, with Gabby disposing of a body, facing arrest and prison, or becoming a fugitive. One of my patrons left this comment, which I thought was very interesting and insightful. She says how Roberta professes her love with words of destruction rather than words of patience and kindness. And I mean, if we review that note, she talks about being in jail. She talks about burying someone. She talks about hating my guts. She talks about, look at someone's actions, and things in a very kind of spiritual sense, but things like also like hunger, homelessness, all that kind of thing. She doesn't seem to see the bright side of love and the beautiful side of love. She seems aware of this sort of dark underbelly to it. So saying, remember, love is a verb. It's not words, it is actions. Watch people's actions to know if they love you. It feels like it was written before the time. That's how I read it. But in the end, what Gabby and Brian both needed was to separate from each other. That's what the Moab Stop was all about. That's what Brian returning to Florida while Gabby was holed up in a hotel, content creating in Salt Lake City. That's what that was all about. So why is keeping up appearances so dangerous, even deadly? Well, if keeping up appearances becomes a default setting, what happens is you lose practice at living real life and at dealing with reality. Then when reality deals with you, as it eventually will, because appearances are nothing more than a flimsy illusion. There's no security in appearances. Well, when reality breaks through, it breaks through in a devastating fashion. And so what is the lesson from all this? What is the lesson from Gabby and Brian's adventure? Well, I would say that it's compromise. Both Gabby and Brian had high, uncompromising standards, for example, about how to look after the environment. But no standard is realistic if we can't be consistent about it. No standard makes practical sense if one exhausts and empties oneself in service of a standard. The lesson from the van life adventure is to be emotionally flexible, to be capable of emotional flexibility. If you're going to do something like that, you need to be emotionally mature. We had the same thing in Amanda Knox's case. And also to understand the importance of work. If you're 20-something and you're going out there, you've got to appreciate that there is going to be working taking place and a work ethic, and that there's going to be a kind of a drudgery of that interfering with the enjoyment of and the thrill of being in these spectacular settings. You can't have the magic without the sweat and tears. The sweat and tears are normal. It's when blood becomes a factor that a line is being crossed. It's when you have sweat and tears, that's normal. But when blood becomes a factor in that, well, then a line is being crossed, and it can never be uncrossed. No matter what the dedication or the desire, once that line is crossed, it's crossed. And then keeping up appearances beyond that point is not only desperate, it's unsafe. Now, unlike Roberta's admonition on how to love and how being inseparable is the highest form of love, I have another one. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. The second half of that verse, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Well, I would say love is enlightened and love is real when it also knows when to quit. Hoping against hope, love as a sort of endurance contest, as an effort to persevere, is precisely how you shouldn't love and how you shouldn't live. It's how all of it will end in tears. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy. Well, think of those words again in the context of social media, and you can see why a van life adventure fueled by social media was always going to be a tall order for insecure Brian, because he wasn't patient. You can see him in the parking lot getting angry, slamming the door. He wasn't emotionally mature, he wasn't kind, couldn't stop envying, and couldn't stop thinking of himself. Each time Gabby posted on Instagram, Brian felt like the record of wrongs against him were piling up, and he wanted Gabby to answer for them. In modern life, part of what couples need to navigate and negotiate is their respective digital lives, their social media strategies. This is increasingly a deal maker or a deal breaker in modern society. So when two people meet up with one another, I think they need to talk about how they see their own social media and what is normal vis-a-vis their partner's social media and what is normal, and also how they're going to acknowledge one another or not in their respective social media, because there are many things to consider: privacy, oversharing, but also maybe you want to acknowledge that and be authentic about the fact that you are in a relationship. So it's all about keeping a healthy balance, right? In terms of social media, just as work-life balance always was during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Think about it. Social media takes up more and more of our attention. It takes up so much of our attention that one's got to bear that in mind, that can be at someone else's expense. And that's why one's got to negotiate and perhaps talk about this quite often. Is my social media use offending you? Is it realistic? Is it a healthy amount? Is it normal? Is it normal for you? How do you feel about it? How do I feel about yours? How do you feel about mine? So it's a conscious effort, and sometimes it's going to involve sacrifices. Okay, I'll do it a little bit less. Figuring your way through this requires patience, it requires flexibility, and it requires emotional maturity from both parties. especially if and when one of you works in social media, especially if you work in that terrain. It can be very easy to always be kind of online and sort of aware of that and out of the sort of real world. When we look at the complete arc of Gabby and Brian's adventure, what caused it to unravel? What fueled the tension the most? Well, I would say the increasingly charged situation of trying to monetize what they were doing. Meanwhile, they are sort of driving up expenses constantly. And I know what that feels like. I've driven across America. I've driven across the length of Oregon and much of California and several other states, Arizona, much of South Carolina, right? And all of that adds up. The food, the fuel, paying for accommodation. Meanwhile, how much are you earning while that's taking place? Running out of money while Brian wanted her all to himself meant the couple were quickly heading towards a situation of paralysis. And think about what's going on. They're trying to draw attention to themselves, right? Plural. Gabby and Brian are both trying to draw attention to themselves during this adventure at the same time. And perhaps one solution to this would have been a joint account. Not instead of Gabby's Instagram and Brian's Instagram, a sort of a joint account. And I guess YouTube could have been that, but they never really got that up and running. And so if you think about it, Gabby needed Brian to be part of the process. He was her driver, he was her photographer, he was her choreographer. And running out of money while Brian wanted her all to himself meant they are heading towards a situation of paralysis. Brian's not interested in the money. He's interested in keeping Gabby, but Gabby's thinking kind of longer term. She's kind of already imagined that Brian is part of this, and now let's move on to the next thing. But what she didn't count on was Brian becoming insecure, or Brian's perhaps lack of work ethic. So what if Gabby did just what Brian wanted? Put down the phone, don't work. What's going to be the result of that? Well, less emotional insecurity for Brian, but ultimately worsening their finances, which then leads to greater stress and then even greater tension as the trip continues. And the result of that, more insecurity. So what could have solved this impasse? Well, besides having something like a joint account, or setting up the social media and trying to get in the habit of it before they went on the van life thing, well, financial independence, that could have solved a lot. And I think they could have worked on this and practiced their social media before heading off into an unrealistic, untested fairy tale. I'm not going to take it further than that. The civil trial against the Laundries is set for May 2024. Look out for the live stream. I'll put a link to that at the very end of this video, where we're going to deal with the timeline as an essential tool in the TCRS toolbox. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.